Yeah, it's been a long time since I did any updates about Lennon. I won't drag this out for those of you that just want me to get to the point. Despite things seemingly going very well with Lennon for ages, she fell at the last hurdle. Things didn't end the way we wanted them to end. I'll try and explain it all. As most of you watching this probably know, Kirsty and me put out a fundraiser for our house rabbit Lennon, basically to afford a surgery she needed. After months and months of our original vets treating Lennon for what they kept saying was a respiratory infection, we eventually took her to a specialist who was able to tell us right away this is a dental infection. It's gotten pretty bad in all this time. It's going to require an x-ray, an abscess draining, and probably a lot of her teeth being removed. In the end, pretty much all of her teeth on the right side were removed, which didn't affect her eating, by the way. I think she'd already adjusted to just eating with one side of her mouth. But I was nervous about the GoFundMe because, asking people for money when we're in a cost of living crisis, it's not great. Offering affordable counselling to low-income families, it doesn't earn me much. Neither does YouTube's ad revenue. We hoped maybe an extra 100 or 200 quid might make the surgery more affordable if I also found some short-term work or set up a plan or something. Turns out all of you donated £2,200, which was incredible. More than even our quote for the surgery was, but very much needed once we got the final bill, and yeah, the surgery was a success. We were told prior and after that with a little bit of antibiotics to clear up anything left, Lennon should be absolutely fine. Not that they could guarantee it, which I guess was the problem. Lennon was an unlikely case, I guess we could say. She did appear to get better at first. There was some aspiration in her lungs from the surgery for which we had to nebulise her a little, but the drooling stopped. So did the retching noises, the sneezing disappeared. She returned to being a very floppy, happy bunny, with only one slight caveat. The shape of her jaw had changed slightly, to which you could feel this lump under her chin on the right side. The vets basically suggested that the abscess had pushed it to reform in a different shape, and that there was a slight chance, despite the abscess being drained, that it might continue to form like that, for which she'd probably need a small dose of painkillers to manage that at some point. Metacam, if you're interested, which is perfectly fine. Those of you here long enough to remember my old rabbit Dylan, he was on Metacam for the last several years of his life for a leg problem. Apart from that, she seemed healthy again, but then after several weeks a bit of sneezing did start to return. Different sneezing this time though. It wasn't the constant aggressive sneezes she had before. It was a very rare one gentle sneeze of her clearing her nostril. Always only the right nostril as well, and then you'd see a tiny bit of white gunk come out of it. So in a way that was better than the symptoms before, but in another way bunnies with discharge from their nose is always a worrying sign. The conclusion was that the antibiotics hadn't fully cleared it up, so this time we had a much longer course. Again, Lennon in seemingly perfect health and happiness all the way through this, flopping, jumping, being very adventurous. But then after that course it started to come back again, not necessarily out of the ordinary. We were told many times that dental infections in bunnies are notoriously difficult to beat and that they can often be on antibiotics for months rather than days to clear it. However, the slight change in symptoms was odd. So our vet basically recommended a CT scan to look more accurately than their x-rays could, and luckily she had a contact at a veterinary college who was doing research into bunnies, so offered it surprisingly cheap to us. That was handy. But the preliminary results of the scan, they weren't awful, but they did explain the problem. The root of the infection was inside Lennon's jawbone. That's why it kept coming back. The oral or even injected antibiotics we did at one point, they weren't they were clearing a lot of it and stopping it from ever getting too bad, but they weren't targeting the right area to completely beat it. That was also why the jaw shape changed, not because of the abscess Lennon had removed, but the infection was inside the bone, causing it to swell. And there are possible treatments for this. I still felt fairly optimistic after this, but the problem was when the full report came back and it became clear that the infection was way worse than it had first appeared. It was spreading to the left side of the jaw, to the upper mouth, despite Lennon being on an oral dose of metronidazole and Baytril at the time. The vet basically explained to us that the only good antibiotic for targeting through the bone for an infection of this kind would be metronidazole. The other antibiotics we'd been on that had proved effective wouldn't be able to penetrate through the bone. I might have misunderstood there. I was paying more attention to the overall prognosis rather than the details when she told me. Basically, if the infection had spread so much despite being on metronidazole, even if it wasn't being administered into the jaw, then that was a sign it wasn't going to be effective enough, that there wasn't anything else we could do. Despite Lennon appearing perfectly happy and healthy, despite her running up to us every morning and flopping fully out and being her playful, happy self, at some point she just wouldn't be that anymore. I think that's kind of what I find hardest about it, because, she doesn't really know anything is wrong. You can't explain it to them. It feels like an injustice when they appear so healthy. So essentially it then became a case of managing her until such a time it got too much. The pain meds for her jaw were upped slightly, but the likelihood was at some point the pain would just become too much. If left long enough, eventually the jawbone would completely shatter, and that would have been awful for her. I'd say we had about a week and a half of Lennon being absolutely fine after the CT scan, and then she started to show signs of pain again. Not huge pain, just slight, but we knew the direction this was going in, and the vet offered higher doses or different pain meds for the time being, but you don't just want to preserve her life for our sake. With even just a minor bit of pain returning, I think that felt like it was time. That was last Monday we put her to sleep, so yeah, we're obviously very sad. Caring for Lennon and trying to help her get better has dominated so much of our life this year that for it to suddenly just end, it kind of feels like we failed at a purpose somehow. So much of our purpose this year was that, and naturally I feel incredibly embarrassed and kind of guilty that we asked for money for something that you could argue ended up entirely fruitless. I would say that it wasn't fruitless, that Lennon had an extra 4 or 5 months of happiness, the vast majority of which was happiness, where there was no pain and no symptoms of anything wrong at all. There were many occasions where we thought we'd beaten it completely, where the vets thought that. We'll cherish those extra 4 months. It also gave us time to bond all 3 bunnies. Lennon and Hendrix were always a pair, but Freddie we basically had been holding back on bonding with them until Lennon was recovered, but in the end we did just bond all 3. We probably started that about a month and a half ago, which now Lennon's gone has been super important for Hendrix. The poor girl wasn't the happiest after Lennon went. You could see she wasn't quite the same at first, but Fred has helped a lot there. The other day we saw Hendrix doing binkies and a few pops again, and that just melted Kirsty's heart. But yeah, I do feel guilty, that was my point. I think posting this update, I am naturally opening up myself to some of you leaving comments saying we should have just put her down 4 months ago, that we've wasted money, that we've wasted your money, that you kindly donated to us, really. And, I think if you feel like that, I think you're justified. I don't think it's the correct opinion to have on the situation, but it's certainly a very valid feeling for you to have. I absolutely do not regret the fundraiser or the last 4 months, but yeah, I have to accept some of you will feel disappointed or annoyed, maybe even feel like I scammed you with this, which again I disagree with, but it's certainly an understandable feeling that it's fair enough you having, and I have to accept that. If I feel guilty and embarrassed, then too right, that's my problem, Lennon was a special bunny, a really special bunny. I've known 5 house rabbits in my life. Kirsty has known 6 in hers. Lennon was by far the sweetest, most friendly, affectionate, relaxed of them all. We'll miss her. I was tempted to make this video into a meaningful one about understanding or processing grief or whatever, like I kind of did in my video about Dylan all those years ago, but I don't think I want to do that. I think I'd rather just grieve, just looking at all the pictures of Lennon I'll need to in order to edit this video is going to break my heart as it is. Kirsty never got to make the YouTube channel for Lennon that we wanted to make when all this was over. Maybe we'll make one for Hendrix and Fred someday, I don't know. We'll think about that stuff some other time. We seem to have gone through a lot of loss these last 2 years. Being a therapist doesn't make that any easier. It's never nice. Yeah, but that's Lennon.